The great chamber of the Galactic Council stretched for miles in every direction. Its walls were made of living crystal that pulsed with soft light. Thousands of seats rose in circles around the central platform, and in those seats sat the representatives of 37 different alien species. Some had scales, some had feathers, some had no solid form at all, but they all shared one thing in common. They were old. Their civilizations had existed for millions of years. They had conquered their homeworlds, spread across the stars, and built empires that spanned entire galaxies. And today, they had gathered to discuss a problem. A small problem. A species called humans. Ambassador Zethro of the Varenian Empire rose from his seat. He was tall and thin, with blue-gray skin and 4 eyes that glowed like dying stars. His people had ruled their corner of the galaxy for 10,000 years. They had crushed rebellions, absorbed smaller empires, and never once faced a threat they could not destroy. "The humans have refused our terms," Zethro announced. His voice echoed through the chamber. "We offered them a chance to surrender their outer colonies peacefully. They said no." Soft sounds of amusement rippled through the audience. The Kefvari delegates clicked their sharp mandibles together. The Silurians, beings made of light and water, flickered with what might have been laughter. "How amusing," said High Commander Vashnak of the Dominion Fleet. He was a massive creature, covered in thick armor-like scales. "These humans have only been in space for 300 years. They control perhaps 200 worlds. And they dare to refuse us?" "They dare," Zethro confirmed. Their ambassador was quite clear. They will not give up their colonies. They will not pay tribute. They will not bend. "Then they will break," Vashnak declared. "I will mobilize the Grand Fleet, 40,000 warships. We will burn their colonies one by one until they beg for mercy." The chamber erupted in sounds of approval. This was how things had always been done. When lesser species refused to submit, they were taught the price of defiance. It had worked for millions of years. It would work again far across the galaxy. On a small blue planet called Earth, a very different meeting was taking place. The room was not grand. It was a simple office with white walls and a wooden desk. There were no crystals, no floating platforms, no representatives from 100 worlds. There was only Secretary of Defense Maria Santos and Admiral Kevin Brooks. 2 humans who carried the weight of their entire species on their shoulders. Maria was 63 years old. She had gray hair that she wore in a simple bun, and tired eyes that had seen too many reports, too many projections, too many worst-case scenarios. Before she became Secretary of Defense, she had been a mother, a teacher, a senator. She had lived a full life. Now she might have to end it by sending her people to war. Kevin sat across from her. He was 67, a career military man who had spent 40 years defending humanity's colonies from pirates, rebels, and the occasional hostile alien species. But nothing had prepared him for this. "Tell me again," Maria said quietly. Kevin activated the holographic display on the desk. A map of the galaxy appeared, with human territory marked in small blue dots. Surrounding those dots, like blood spreading through water, was the red of the Galactic Council's forces. "They are assembling the largest fleet in recorded history," Kevin explained. "Over 40,000 warships. Their smallest cruisers are twice the size of our largest battleships. Their technology is centuries ahead of ours, maybe more." Maria stared at the map. Such a small blue stain. Such a vast red ocean. "How long?" she asked. 6 months. Maybe 7 if we are lucky." Maria closed her eyes. She thought of her daughter Lisa, who lived on the colony world of New Boston. She thought of her grandchildren, twins named Carlos and Elena, who had just started school. She thought of her husband, Roberto, who still made her coffee every morning and kissed her forehead every night. She thought of all the humans on all the worlds, living their small and precious lives, completely unaware that an alien armada was coming to end everything they had ever known. "What are our options?" she asked. Kevin's face was grim. "Conventional warfare is suicide. We cannot match their numbers or their firepower. Even if we threw every ship we have at them, we would barely slow them down. So we surrender?" "No." Kevin leaned forward. "We do something else. Something they will never expect." He pulled up another file on the display. Maria recognized it immediately. Project Nightmare. She had approved the funding herself, years ago, hoping it would never be needed. "You want to use the fear weapons," she said. "I want to use everything," Kevin replied. "The psychological warfare systems, the autonomous hunter-killers, the signal disruptors, all of it." Maria felt something cold settle in her stomach. She had read the reports on those weapons. She knew what they could do. They were not designed to destroy enemy ships. They were designed to break enemy minds, to reach into the deepest parts of alien brains and trigger responses that evolution had built over millions of years. Panic, terror, the overwhelming need to flee. "We built those weapons as a last resort," she said. "Maria." Kevin's voice was soft. "This is the last resort. If we do not use them, humanity dies. Not just our soldiers. Everyone. Every man, woman, and child on every world we have ever touched." The room was silent for a long moment. Maria thought about what it meant to be human. She thought about all the stories her grandmother had told her as a child. Stories about monsters in the dark. Wolves and witches and things that crept in shadows. Humans had always been afraid. They had always known they were fragile. They had always known that death could come at any moment, from any direction. And because they knew this, they had learned to prepare for it, to imagine the worst, to build weapons against nightmares that might never come. Well, the nightmares had come now, and humanity had weapons ready. "Do it," Maria said finally. "Activate everything. And God forgive us for what we are about to become." Kevin nodded and stood to leave. At the door, he paused. "Maria," he said, "they think we are afraid of war. They think our fear makes us weak. And?" Kevin smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "They have no idea what fear really means, but they will learn." He walked out, leaving Maria alone with the map of the galaxy. She stared at those small blue dots for a long time. Then she reached for her communicator and called her daughter. "Lisa?" "It is Mom. I just wanted to tell you that I love you. Tell Carlos and Elena that Grandma loves them too." She did not tell her about the war. She did not tell her about the alien fleet. She simply said the words that humans had always said to each other when darkness was coming. "I love you. Hold on, we will find a way." And somewhere in the vast machinery of the Terran military, Project Nightmare began to wake up. The war room of the Galactic Council floated in orbit above Vorinian Prime, a massive station shaped like a ring of silver and gold. Inside, hundreds of military officers from a dozen species studied holographic displays, calculated trajectories, and planned the destruction of human civilization. Tactical analyst. Curvin moved through the room like a snake through water. Her species, the SciFi, had no legs. They slithered on long, muscular tails, and their upper bodies were covered in scales that shifted color with their moods. Right now, Curvin's scales were bright yellow, the color of confidence, the color of certain victory. She stopped before the main display, where a three-dimensional map showed the positions of all human colonies. Small blue lights scattered across a tiny corner of the galaxy. So few, so fragile. The human fleet consists of approximately 8,000 vessels, Curvin reported to the assembled commanders. Their largest ships, which they call dreadnoughts, are roughly half the size of our standard cruisers. Their weapons technology is primitive. Their shields are weak. Their hyperspace drives are slow. High Commander Vashnak rumbled with satisfaction. How long until we reach their first colonies? The Vanguard fleet will arrive at the Vega system in 4 standard cycles. From there, we can push toward their core worlds within 6 cycles. And estimated casualties? Curvin's scales flickered briefly to a cooler shade. For us? Minimal. Perhaps a few hundred ships if they fight hard. For them? Total. We will leave nothing standing. The commanders nodded and murmured their approval. This was how wars had always gone. The strong crushed the weak. The old devoured the young. It was the natural order of the universe. None of them understood what they were about to face, because none of them had ever truly been afraid. On a small ship called the Resolute, Captain Danny Martinez stood on the bridge and watched the stars. He was 34 years old, born on Mars in a small settlement called New Phoenix. His parents had been miners. His grandparents had been farmers. His great-grandparents had been refugees from a climate disaster on Earth. Every generation of his family had known struggle. Every generation had known fear. Danny was afraid now. He could feel it in his chest, a cold weight that made it hard to breathe. Somewhere out there, an alien fleet was coming to kill everyone he had ever loved. His mother, who still sent him messages every week. His sister, who had just had her first child. His friends from the academy. His crew. All of them were targets in a war they had not started and could not win. And yet, beneath the fear, something else stirred. Something old. Something that had kept his ancestors alive through ice ages and plagues and wars and all the terrible things that the universe had thrown at them. Captain? Lieutenant Samantha Price approached him. She was his first officer, a small woman with red hair and sharp green eyes. She was 29, and she had been with him for 3 years. All systems are ready. The fleet is assembled. Danny turned to face her. How is the crew? Scared, Samantha admitted. We all watch the briefings. We know what we are up against. Good, Danny said. Fear is useful. Fear keeps you sharp. Samantha looked at him curiously. You really believe that? Danny walked to the main view screen and stared out at the darkness. Do you know why humans became the dominant species on Earth, Sam? It was not because we were the strongest, or the fastest, or the deadliest. There were creatures on our home world that could kill us with a single bite. Predators that could outrun us, outfight us, outsmart us. Then how did we survive? We were afraid. Danny turned back to her. We feared the dark, so we invented fire. We feared the cold, so we built shelters. We feared predators, so we made weapons. We feared death, so we created medicine. Every great human achievement began with fear. Samantha considered this. But the aliens are not afraid. They have lived for millions of years. They have conquered everything in their path. Exactly. Danny smiled, but it was not a happy smile. They have forgotten what fear feels like. They think it makes us weak. They do not understand that fear is why we imagine every possible danger. Why we prepare for disasters that might never happen. Why we build weapons against threats that do not yet exist. He gestured at the ship around them. This vessel, and every vessel in our fleet, carries weapons that humans invented because they were afraid of things that lived only in their imaginations. Monsters, demons, nightmares. We created weapons against dreams. Sam, and now those dreams are going to become very real. In the cargo holds of human ships across the fleet, the weapons of Project Nightmare waited in silence. They did not look like weapons. Some looked like clouds of black dust. Some looked like twisted sculptures of metal and wire. Some had no visible form at all, existing only as patterns of electromagnetic radiation stored in quantum computers. but all of them shared a single purpose. They were designed to reach into the minds of alien beings and find the fear that lived there. The ancient fear. The primal fear. The fear that evolution had buried deep in every species that had ever lived and died under alien. Some the fear of the dark, the fear of being hunted. The fear of things that should not exist. Humans had lived with those fears for their entire history. They had told stories about them, painted pictures of them, made movies about them. They had stared into the abyss of their own terror and mapped every inch of it. Now they were going to share that map with the galaxy. Admiral Kevin Brooks stood on the bridge of the command ship Defiance and addressed the assembled fleet through the communication network. "In 6 hours, we will engage the enemy," he said. "You have all seen the numbers. You know that we cannot win a conventional war. You know that our ships are smaller, our weapons weaker, our technology inferior." He paused, letting the weight of those words settle. "But we have something they do not have. We have spent our entire existence learning to be afraid, learning to imagine the worst, learning to prepare for nightmares. The enemy thinks this makes us weak. They think that because we fear, we will break." His voice hardened. "They are wrong. Today, we will show them what fear truly means. We will reach into their minds and show them every monster they have ever forgotten. We will remind them what it feels like to be prey. And when this is over, they will understand why humans have survived every disaster, every extinction, every threat that has ever come for us." He raised his fist. "We are afraid. We have always been afraid. And that is exactly why we will win." Across the fleet, 8,000 ships powered up their weapons. Not guns, not missiles, not lasers. Nightmares. And somewhere in the cold darkness between stars, the Vorinian vanguard fleet approached, confident in their superiority, completely unaware that they were about to learn the true meaning of terror. The council chamber had never been so quiet. Representatives from 37 species sat in their seats, but none of them spoke. None of them moved. They simply stared at the holographic display in the center of the room, watching the recorded footage from the Battle of Vega play over and over again. Ships fleeing in terror, crews abandoning their posts, admirals screaming into their communicators. And behind it all, the shapes. The impossible, horrible shapes that move through space like nightmares given form. Ambassador Zethral stood at his podium, but his usual confidence was gone. His scales were dull. His eyes were dim. He looked like a creature that had seen something it could not forget. "This recording was transmitted by the survivors of our vanguard fleet," he said. His voice was hoarse. "Of the 3,000 ships we sent to Vega, approximately 2,000 made it back. The rest were destroyed in collisions during the retreat, or their crews were rendered completely non-functional." "Non-functional?" repeated War Minister Thelvin. His golden scales flickered with concern. "What does that mean?" "It means they could not operate their ships. Some of them could not speak. Some of them could not move. Some of them simply sat and stared at nothing, even as their vessels crashed into each other." Zethral paused. "Admiral Kethver, one of our most decorated commanders, was found curled in a corner of his shuttle bay, sucking his thumb like an infant. He has not spoken a coherent word since." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. This was not how wars were supposed to go. The Varinian Empire had crushed 100 rebellions. They had absorbed a dozen lesser civilizations. They had never, in 10,000 years of conquest, experienced anything like this. "What manner of weapon is this?" demanded High Commander Vashanak. His voice was less certain than before. "What did the humans do to our fleet?" "We do not know," Jethral admitted. "Our scientists are analyzing the sensor data. They believe the humans use some form of psychological attack. Signals and images designed to trigger fear responses in organic minds. But our soldiers are trained to resist psychological warfare, Voshnak protested. They are veterans of hundreds of campaigns. They are veterans of conventional campaigns, said a new voice. It was old and dry, like sand shifting through broken glass. They are not prepared for what the humans have created. Every eye in the chamber turned toward the speaker. He sat in a corner that few had noticed, wrapped in robes so old they seemed to predate the council itself. Scholar Vinthus, the oldest living being in the chamber. Perhaps the oldest living being in the galaxy. Vinthus rose slowly from his seat and moved toward the central display. He was ancient beyond measure, his body supported by mechanical implants that hummed softly in the silence. But his mind was sharp, his eyes were clear, and when he spoke, everyone listened. I have lived for 7 million years, Vinthus said. I have watched empires rise and fall. I have seen species evolve from animals to gods and then fade into extinction. And in all that time, I have never encountered a species quite like humans. He gestured at the display, where the Varenian ships were still fleeing from the shapes in the darkness. You look at them and see weakness. You see short lifespans and fragile bodies and limited technology. You see prey. Vinthus shook his head slowly. But you do not understand what it means to be prey. Prey is weak, Voshnak said dismissively. Prey is meant to be hunted and consumed. Yes, Vinthus agreed. And that is exactly why prey becomes strong. Consider the humans. They evolved on a world filled with predators, creatures with fangs and claws and venom. Creatures that could outrun them, outfight them, kill them with ease. By all logic, humans should have gone extinct millions of years ago. He turned to face the assembly, but they did not. Because humans learned to fear. And because they feared, they learned to prepare. They built weapons. They formed groups. They developed strategies. They imagined every possible danger and created defenses against threats that had not yet appeared. Vinthus pointed at the frozen image of a nightmare shape on the display. Do you know what that thing is? It is a creature from human imagination, a monster from their stories. They have thousands of such monsters, millions. They have spent their entire existence creating nightmares, not because they are mad, but because their survival depended on anticipating every possible threat. But these things are not real, Talvin protested. They are illusions, projections. Our soldiers should be able to recognize that, should they? Vinthus smiled, but it was not a pleasant smile. Tell me, War Minister, when was the last time you felt true fear? Not concern, not anxiety, true, primal fear. The kind that makes your muscles lock and your mind go blank. The kind that evolution built into every living creature to keep them alive when predators came hunting. Thalvin did not answer. You do not remember, Vinthus said. None of you do. We have lived too long. We have conquered too much. We have become so powerful that we have forgotten what it feels like to be weak, to be hunted, to be afraid. He gestured at the display again. But humans never forgot. They carry fear with them every moment of their lives. They fear disease and death and each other and 1,000 other things. And because they fear, they imagine. They imagine monsters that do not exist, horrors that have never been, nightmares that defy all logic. And now they have made those nightmares real. The chamber was completely silent. You ask what manner of weapon this is, Vinthus continued. I will tell you. It is not a weapon. It is a mirror. The humans have simply shown our soldiers what they have forgotten how to see. The darkness. The things that hunted our ancestors before we became masters of the stars. The fear that lives in the oldest parts of our brains, buried so deep that we thought it was gone. Then how do we fight them? Zethral asked. His voice was barely a whisper. Vinthus was silent for a long moment. "I do not know if we can," he finally said. "We have built our military on the assumption that we would always be the predators. We trained our soldiers to attack, to conquer, to dominate. But we never trained them to be afraid. And now we face an enemy that has mastered fear itself. There must be a way," Vashnak insisted. "We have 40,000 ships. We have weapons that can destroy planets. Surely we can overwhelm them with sheer force." "You can try," Vinthus said. "But remember this. Humans have been preparing for extinction since the day they became intelligent. They have built bunkers and vaults and survival plans for every possible disaster. They have written stories about the end of their species and found ways to survive even in their fiction. They are, quite possibly, the most paranoid species in the galaxy." He began to walk back toward his seat, his mechanical supports clicking on the crystal floor. "And paranoid creatures are very, very dangerous when cornered." As he sat down, Vinthus delivered his final words. "You wanted a war. You wanted to teach humans the meaning of fear. But I suspect, before this is over, they will teach you something far more important." "What?" Zethral asked. Vinthus looked at him with ancient, tired eyes. "What it feels like to be prey." The council session ended without a decision. For the first time in 10,000 years, the great powers of the galaxy did not know what to do. They had never faced an enemy like this. They had never fought a species that treated fear as a weapon instead of a weakness. And somewhere in the darkness between stars, the human fleet waited, patient, prepared, ready to show the galaxy every nightmare it had ever forgotten. Because humans had never forgotten, and they never would. The Vega system was quiet when the Varenian vanguard arrived. 3,000 warships dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming under the light of the distant star. Admiral Kethver stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Conquest, and surveyed the empty space before him. "Sensors?" he demanded. "Nothing, Admiral." His sensor officer, a young Varenian named Tethril, studied his displays with confusion. "No human ships. No defensive platforms. No mines. The system appears to be abandoned." Kethver frowned. His four eyes narrowed with suspicion. "That makes no sense. Vega is one of their major colony systems. They would not simply leave it undefended. Perhaps they have retreated to their core worlds," suggested his first officer. "Perhaps they know they cannot win and have decided to consolidate their forces. Perhaps." Kethver did not believe it. In his 500 years of military service, he had learned to trust his instincts. And right now, his instincts were screaming that something was very wrong. "Launch scout drones," he ordered. "Full sensor sweep of the system. I want to know every rock, every piece of debris, every anomaly." The drones scattered from the fleet like seeds from a flower, spreading across millions of miles of empty space. Their sensors probed asteroids and scanned planets and searched the darkness for any sign of human presence. They found nothing. And then they found everything. It started with a sound. Not a sound that traveled through space, but a sound that appeared directly inside the minds of every being in the Varenian fleet. It was low and deep, like the heartbeat of something enormous. It vibrated in their bones and resonated in their skulls and touched something ancient buried deep in their genetic memory. The sound of a predator. "What is that?" Tethril whispered. His scales had gone pale. His hands were shaking. Kethver opened his mouth to respond, but the words died in his throat. Because the darkness was moving. At first, he thought it was a trick of the light. Shadows shifting against the backdrop of stars. But then the shadows grew closer, and he realized with dawning horror that they were not shadows at all. They were shapes. Massive shapes. Shapes that defied geometry and logic and everything the Varenians knew about the universe. They had too many angles, too many dimensions. They folded in on themselves and unfolded again, revealing glimpses of something that the mind refused to process. Alarms screamed across the fleet. Officers shouted in panic. Weapons powered up and fired blindly into the approaching darkness. The shapes absorbed the weapons' fire without effect. They did not slow. They did not stop. They simply continued their inexorable approach, growing larger and more wrong with every passing second. And they began to whisper. The whispers came on every frequency. They slid through communications channels and navigation systems, and even the neural implants that many Varanians used to interface with their ships. The whispers were not words, not exactly. They were concepts, ideas, images that burned themselves into the minds of everyone who heard them. Death, consumption, an endless hunger that had no beginning and no end. Kethver gripped his command chair with all four hands. His hearts were pounding. His breath came in short, ragged gasps. He had fought in 100 battles. He had faced enemies that could crack planets and destroy stars. But he had never felt anything like this. This was not fear. This was something beyond fear. This was the certainty, deep and absolute, that something was coming for him. Something that could not be stopped or reasoned with or escaped. Something that wanted to consume him, body and soul, and leave nothing behind. Admiral, Tethril screamed. The fleet is breaking apart. Kethver forced himself to look at the tactical display. What he saw made his blood freeze. Ships were fleeing in every direction. Cruisers were colliding with destroyers as their crews abandoned any pretense of formation. Some vessels had stopped entirely, their crews apparently unable to function. Others were firing on each other, their targeting systems driven mad by the signals, flooding their electronics, and still the shapes came closer. One of them passed near the Eternal Conquest, and Kethver saw it clearly for the first time. It was not a ship. It was not a creature. It was a collection of parts that should not have fit together. Tendrils and teeth and eyes that watched from impossible angles. It moved without engines, existed without physics, and radiated a presence that made Kethver want to curl into a ball and weep. But the worst part was the familiarity. Somewhere, deep in the oldest parts of his brain, Kethver recognized this thing. His ancestors had feared it. They had built temples to keep it away and performed sacrifices to appease its hunger. They had painted warnings on cave walls and whispered stories to their children about the things that came in the dark. The Varanians had forgotten those stories. They had evolved. They had conquered. They had become the masters of their corner of the galaxy. And now the darkness had returned. Retreat, Kethver croaked. His voice was barely a whisper. All ships, retreat. Full speed. Now. The Varanian vanguard fled. 3,000 warships, the pride of an empire that had never known defeat, ran like children from a nightmare. They did not maintain formation. They did not cover each other. They simply ran, each ship for itself, desperate to escape the things that pursued them. The shapes did not chase them. They did not need to. The fear had already taken root. 11 minutes. That was how long the Battle of Vega lasted. 11 minutes from the first whisper to the last Varanian ship vanishing into hyperspace. On the bridge of the Resolute, Captain Danny Martinez watched the sensor readings with grim satisfaction. Beside him, Lieutenant Samantha Price let out a long breath. "It worked," she said. "I did not really believe it would work." "Neither did I," Danny admitted. "But the psychologists were right. Every species that evolved on a planet has the same basic fears. The dark, the unknown, the thing that hunts you. We just had to find the right way to trigger those fears. How did we do it? What are those things out there?" Danny pulled up a technical readout. "They are drones," Autonomous systems designed by our best engineers and our worst horror writers. The shapes are generated by projectors and force fields. The whispers are electromagnetic signals tuned to frequencies that our scientists identified as universal fear responses. The whole thing is basically a haunted house on a massive scale. Samantha stared at him. We won a battle with haunted house technology? We won a battle by remembering what it feels like to be afraid. Danny turned back to the view screen. Those aliens have been apex predators for so long that they forgot what prey feels like. We never forgot. We built an entire entertainment industry around fear. Horror movies, ghost stories, creepy video games. We taught ourselves to enjoy being scared because it was the only way to cope with being scared all the time. And now we are using that against them. Danny nodded. This is just the beginning, Sam. The Council has 40,000 ships. We cannot scare all of them. Eventually, they will adapt. They will find ways to block the signals and shield their minds. And when that happens, we will need to fight for real. But until then, Danny smiled, and there was something ancient in his eyes. Something that remembered caves and campfires and the sound of wolves howling in the darkness. Until then, we remind them why humans learned to fear the dark. Because the things we imagined in that darkness were always worse than anything the universe could actually produce. Far away. On Verenian Prime, Admiral Kethver stumbled off his shuttle and collapsed on the landing pad. His crew found him there an hour later, still shaking, still whimpering, still seeing shapes that twisted at the edges of his vision. He never commanded a ship again, and across the galaxy, the Galactic Council began to understand that they had made a terrible mistake. 6 months after the first battle, the war ended. Not with the destruction of humanity, not with the victory of the Council, but with something that neither side had expected. Surrender. The great fleets of the Galactic Council gathered at the edge of human space, 40,000 ships strong. They had developed countermeasures against the fear weapons. They had trained their crews to resist psychological attacks. They had prepared for a brutal, bloody conflict that would end only when one side was completely destroyed. And then, they surrendered. It was not a sudden decision. It came after months of fighting, months of losses, months of watching their soldiers return from battle as broken shells of their former selves. The fear weapons were just the beginning. Humans had other weapons. Worse weapons. Weapons that attacked not just the mind, but the very will to fight. There were viruses that spread despair through neural networks. There were drones that whispered doubts into communications channels. There were bombs that did not explode, but simply sat in the middle of enemy fleets, ticking softly, counting down to nothing, forcing crews to wonder when the end would come. The humans did not fight like warriors. They fought like survivors, like creatures that had spent millions of years learning every trick, every strategy, every dirty tactic that could keep them alive for just one more day. And in the end, the Council broke. Ambassador Zethral led the delegation to Earth. His ship was escorted by human vessels, including the Resolute, now under the command of Admiral Danny Martinez. Danny had been promoted twice during the war. He was 35 now, and he looked much older. The shuttle descended through Earth's atmosphere, passing over blue oceans and green continents and white clouds that drifted lazily across a peaceful sky. Zethral watched through the viewport, trying to understand. This was the world that had produced the nightmare weapons. This small, fragile planet, third from an ordinary star, home to a species that had only been civilized for a few thousand years. How could something so insignificant have defeated the greatest military power in the galaxy? The shuttle landed in a city called Washington. Zethral stepped out onto a concrete pad surrounded by trees and grass and flowers. Birds sang in the branches. A warm breeze carried the scent of something sweet. And everywhere he looked, he saw humans. Not soldiers, not warriors, just people. Families walking through parks, children playing games, old couples sitting on benches, holding hands, watching the clouds drift by. Secretary Maria Santos met him at the bottom of the steps. She looked tired. There were more lines on her face than before, more gray in her hair. But her eyes were steady and her handshake was firm. "Ambassador Zethral," she said, "welcome to Earth." Zethral looked around at the peaceful scene and felt his confusion grow. "I do not understand," he admitted. "Your weapons, your tactics, they were monstrous, horrifying, and yet this place seems so normal?" Maria smiled, but there was sadness in it. "Yes, I suppose it does." She began to walk, and Zethral followed. They moved through the city, past shops and restaurants and schools, past humans going about their daily lives as if a galactic war had not just been won. "We did not want this war," Maria said. "We never wanted to create those weapons. We never wanted to become the monsters that live in the dark." "Then why did you?" Maria stopped beside a playground. Children were climbing on structures and swinging on swings and laughing with pure, innocent joy. She watched them for a long moment before answering. "Because of them," she said. "Because of my grandchildren, my daughter, my husband, every human being on every world we have touched. We created those weapons because we had to, because the alternative was extinction." She turned to face him. "Do you know what fear really is, Ambassador? It is not weakness. It is not cowardice. It is love. It is loving something so much that the thought of losing it makes you willing to do anything, become anything, to protect it." Zethral thought about his own people, his own family, his own world. He tried to imagine what he would do if someone threatened to destroy everything he cared about. "We thought your fear made you weak," he said slowly. "We thought we could use it against you." "Everyone thinks that," Maria agreed. They see humans flinching at shadows and jumping at sounds and worrying about things that might never happen. They see us as nervous, anxious creatures who scare ourselves with our own imaginations. She smiled. "But our imaginations are why we are still here. We imagine every possible disaster because we want to survive them. We tell horror stories because we want to be ready when the horrors become real. We fear the dark because we learned millions of years ago that the dark is where the predators live." Maria gestured at the children on the playground. "They will grow up knowing fear. They will have nightmares and worries and anxieties that keep them awake at night. And that is good, because that fear will make them careful. It will make them prepare. It will make them imagine every threat and build defenses against dangers that do not yet exist." "Like the weapons you used against us," Jethro said. "Like those weapons, yes." Maria nodded. "We built them decades ago, hoping we would never need them, hoping that the galaxy would leave us in peace. But we knew, deep in our hearts, that peace never lasts forever. So we prepared for war. Not because we wanted it, but because we were afraid of what would happen if we were not ready." They walked in silence for a while, past more humans living their ordinary lives. Zethral noticed things he had not noticed before. The way parents watched their children constantly, always alert for danger. The way strangers smiled at each other but kept a careful distance. The way everyone moved with a subtle awareness of their surroundings, as if they were always expecting something to go wrong. Fear, it was everywhere, woven into every aspect of human society. But it was not the fear of prey cowering before a predator. It was the fear of creatures who had learned to use their terror as a tool, as a weapon, as a reason to survive. "What are your terms?" Zethral finally asked. "What do you want from the council?" Maria stopped walking. They had arrived at the steps of a large building, white columns rising toward a clear blue sky. Human guards stood at attention, but they did not look threatening. They looked like what they were. Ordinary people, doing an ordinary job, protecting an ordinary world. "We want peace," Maria said. "Real peace. Not tribute. Not territory. Not promises of submission. Just an agreement to leave each other alone. That is all? That is all." Maria met his four eyes with her too. "We do not want your worlds. We do not want your resources. We do not want to rule the galaxy or conquer the stars. We just want to live, to raise our children, to love each other, to grow old in peace." Her voice hardened. "But if you threaten what we love, we will become your nightmares. Every single one of them. We will reach into your minds and find every fear you have ever buried, every terror you have ever forgotten, every horror that your ancestors whispered about around ancient fires. And we will make them real." Zethral believed her. After everything he had seen, he could not do anything else. "The Council will accept your terms," he said. "We will leave you in peace." Maria nodded. Some of the tension left her shoulders. She suddenly looked less like a war leader and more like what she was. A grandmother. A wife. A woman who had carried an impossible weight for too long. "Thank you," she said softly. "Thank you for understanding." The peace treaty was signed that afternoon. It was a simple document. Just a few pages. A promise to respect borders. A promise to avoid conflict. A promise to let humanity live in peace. As Zethral boarded his shuttle to leave, he took one last look at the small blue planet below. Such a fragile world. Such a beautiful world. Filled with creatures who loved and feared and dreamed and imagined and refused. Absolutely refused to give up. He understood now. He understood why humans had survived every disaster. Why they had built weapons against nightmares. Why they had defeated the greatest military force in the galaxy. Because they knew, better than any species in the cosmos, that everything they loved could be taken away in an instant. And that knowledge had made them strong. Stronger than anyone had ever imagined. The shuttle rose through the clouds and left Earth behind. Zethral watched until the planet was just a tiny blue dot against the infinite black of space. "Let the humans be," he whispered to himself. "They have earned their peace." And in the darkness between stars, humanity continued as it always had. Loving, dreaming, fearing, preparing, holding each other close against the endless night, because that was what it meant to be human. And perhaps, finally, the galaxy was beginning to understand.